Hi, I'm Ilana Fine, Chief Operating Officer of VWG Wealth Management. I'd like to welcome you to this month's Your Life webinar. For those of you new to VWG, our advisors have been working together as a team for over 15 years, 8 years at Morgan Stanley and 7 years as a registered independent advisory team. We have 15 team members, 7 who are certified financial planners, and we manage close to $1.5 billion in assets. Since our last webinar focused on financial tools for your personal finances, we thought we'd pivot to a topic many of our clients are contending with as professionals: attracting, motivating, and retaining key executives. VWG has built a strong reputation among business owners and entrepreneurs for 2 key reasons. First, our portfolio of non-correlated private alternative investments is attractive to investors with wealth concentrated in one sector, like the owner of a real estate company or a C-level executive whose compensation is highly correlated to the markets. And secondly, and the reason we are expanding the reach of this educational series, is that we understand that business planning and personal financial planning are interconnected. Consequently, we have developed expertise on a variety of financial tools and benefits that our clients might be offering new business partners or might be offered by employers as they negotiate complex executive comp packages. Since some of these tools can be complex, evaluating the potential value and tax implications of various stock options, profit sharing, bonus structures, and other benefits beyond salary can be daunting and even problematic to do on your own. As labor markets continue to tighten, companies will deploy additional and potentially more complicated incentive packages to recruit, motivate, and retain top talent. Today's seminar will hopefully demystify some of those tools and structures. I'll now turn the mic over to my colleague, Christina James, one of our advisors and certified financial planners, to go through our agenda and introduce our panelists. Christina?
Thank you, Ilana, and thank you to everyone joining us today. I'm Christina James, and financial advisor at VWG. Today's webinar is focused on attracting, motivating, and retaining key executives. Joining us to discuss this important topic is Brian Taft, CEO of StreetSense, Jeff Grinspoon, financial advisor and partner at VWG Wealth Management, and Kim Moulton, senior benefits consultant at Marsh & McLennan. First, I will moderate a conversation with Brian Taft to get a CEO's perspective on attracting and retaining employees in today's tight labor market. Jeff Grinspoon will then share with us the various financial incentives that an employer can establish to help motivate employees. Kim Moulton will show us how to put it all together with a comprehensive benefits package. And finally, I will moderate a Q&A session with our panelists. Without further ado, we are thrilled to have Brian Taft here with us today. Brian is a serial entrepreneur and CEO of StreetSense, an experience-focused strategy and design collective. We could talk a lot about why we have asked Brian to be here today, but I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to him so that he can tell us more about StreetSense and how he thinks about attracting and retaining employees. Brian?
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. It's definitely early, but I'm happy to be here, so thank you. A little bit about StreetSense and a little background. StreetSense is a creative consultancy. We work in the real estate development, retail, and hospitality industries. We were founded in 2001, originally based here in Washington, D.C. We still are based here in Washington, D.C. We have about 170 employees today with offices in D.C., New York, Los Angeles, and Madrid. We focus on working to create, very interesting environments and elevating brands. We like to say we create brands people love and places people love to be. We've worked on a lot of projects here in the Washington, D.C. area, as well as all over the country and throughout the world. Some interesting projects, here in D.C. that we've worked on include projects in Blagden Alley in Washington, D.C. That include restaurants and bakeries and even our own offices. So anyway, great to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Brian. StreetSense has had an incredible growth spurt, and I've seen where you have announced some great hires to your team. How are you attracting top talent to StreetSense?
So I think one of the key things about StreetSense that's been exciting, for me and I believe for a lot of the other key executives is the opportunity to be involved in an organization that's growing, that has its sight set above the horizon. And so I think for a lot of businesses, what key executives want to know is, what type of organization, they're going to join. And is that organization an organization that wants to grow, that wants to continue to evolve, and that's an organization where they can have a really good impact and then be rewarded, for the impact that they help create.
Great. And when you're hiring these people, what are the benefits that they're most interested in? What do you see as a must-have right now?
For key executives, the thing that continues to pop up over and over again, I would say are two key things. One is flexibility, and flexibility is not just with time, but it's with the authority, and the autonomy to be able to get things done. So I think that's one. And the second, and probably most important, is a real alignment with the value creation for the organization. Recently, we've put in place a key executive incentive plan that's a long-term incentive plan that aligns, our key executives with the growth, of the organization. Over the past 8 years, we've grown from about 30 people and about 4 million in revenue to now about 165, 170 people and more than 30 million in revenue. And that growth trajectory has been something that I think has attracted a lot of the key executives to be involved in how are they going to be rewarded for helping continue to grow and advance, the organization. So this key executive incentive plan is a long-term plan that's allowed us to say, hey, if we continue to grow the organization and create value within the organization, our key executives are going to benefit from it in the long term.
That's excellent. What are your challenges in retaining those key employees and making sure that they see that long-term growth in the company and stay with you to realize that growth?
I think a few things, as an entrepreneurial organization and one that's grown rapidly, I'd say there's a few things that, are a challenge to retaining key employees. The first one usually is me, is the challenge. And, the reality is that as we're growing, as we're growing fast, creating the ability and the autonomy for key executives, to be able to bring, not just their backgrounds and their history, but their brains, to the organization, and to be able to, stay out of their way so that they can execute and accomplish, what they need. At the same time, when you have a rapidly growing organization, it's evolving, rapidly. And so as we continue to bring on, more, key executives, which we have, it's changing the roles and focusing the roles where we can create the greatest amount of impact. And so I think, the key thing there has been, making sure that everyone, feels like they're, completely engaged, they're in the loop, and that they're contributing, to the growth of the organization. One of the key factors that has been a driver of people that, we're not able to retain is just the market itself. And that is, other organizations that are coming into the marketplace, going after key employees and offering them things that small and growing organizations might not be able to offer. And so constantly being able to think about, what are those key things that are going to align our executives with not only the growth of the organization, but the impact that we can have on the community, which is the communities that we work in, but also the community of our staff and the growth of the staff really become, very important, and they're very important to us.
Can you give some specifics of, what's pulling employees away when a competitor comes to them and they offer what pulls them away from StreetSense?
Well, so far we've been pretty fortunate that, we've been able to retain a lot of, our key employees in terms of, key executives on the growth of the organization. But I would say the biggest factors that we see are larger organizations that can offer things like, stock options that can provide, some unique benefits that, we would not be able to provide as it relates to location, opportunity, to be able to oversee, very large and key lines of business. But I would say one of the things that I hear a lot, are the stock options that public companies, can offer. And candidly, it's one of the things that moved us to really thinking about, how can, we're a growth company. In a lot of ways, we're growing faster than some of these public companies. And in many cases, we are. So that was one of the things that really led us to look inward and say, there's in-year compensation, there's short-term compensation benefits, but there's also long-term compensation and long-term incentives. And I'd say that was probably the key thing that led us to our key executive incentive plan, our long-term stock appreciation incentive plan.
So is your key executive plan, is that part of like a deferred comp plan? Is it a mixture of a deferred comp and a stock plan? How exactly are you structuring this?
So our organization, I would say it's a combination. So it is deferred compensation. And that deferred compensation is in the form of, as you articulate, it's a stock appreciation plan. So it allows the executives to participate in the growth of the organization over time. And it's a plan that continues to build on itself year after year. So every year, key executives are able to participate in the plan, based on, the performance of the organization. But it's every year it accumulates, and it then manifests, over a period of time. The executives are able to take that with them when they leave, or it gets paid out after a certain period. I think it's 10 years.
Wow. Do you talk to your key executive team regularly to show them the benefits that they're getting with StreetSense, to help them see the value?
I think it's a regular conversation. The great thing about, kind of key executive dynamic is you can have a conversation about what they're bringing to the organization in terms of creating value for the organization. And then simultaneously, we get a chance to have that conversation about, how they're rewarded for the value that's brought. I will say that this plan is new. This is the first year, for StreetSense that we've done this. We just, have gotten to a size, and the organization about 18 months ago, actually exactly 18 months ago, we did a transaction with CBRE, which is the largest real estate advisory services company in the world, where they ended up creating strategic investment in StreetSense. So because of the dynamics, of the ownership, which is 50% by CBRE and 50% by StreetSense executives, we had to create a plan that rewarded the new executives that we were attracting, and to be able to retain them, a way to participate in the upside of the organization. So this year, we implemented this. And it is a conversation that we're having regularly because it's new, and because we want to create as much transparency into the plan, and also allow everyone to understand what are the key drivers for them, where they can have an impact, not just for themselves, but an impact for the organization as a whole. So one, yes, the answer is we're having those conversations, but two, it's really become a learning process. I think for a lot of entrepreneurial companies that are growing, that feel like they want to get alignment and create alignment, we think that this is a really great opportunity. It's something that we're very, very excited about, and we think our executives are very excited about, but it is a constant conversation.
Okay. I think the fact that you're transparent and you're educating your employees about the benefits, I think that just really helps develop employee buy-in and commitment to the company. When employees don't understand what they're getting, they don't have that same commitment or feeling of part of the organization. So that's That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that is important is this idea of feeling, valued. And so, key executives, they have a lot of responsibility, and responsibility, for us, is really focused on everybody who walks in the door, every day. And for them to be thinking that the organization is also focused not just on staff as a whole, but on the value that they're bringing each day, and the alignment with the executive team as a whole is something that we find to be very, very important as well.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, for everything that you've shared. Very exciting things happening at StreetSense, and we'll be looking out for StreetSense projects around the DC area. So thank you so much. I'm now going to turn it over to Jeff Grinspoon.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate the insights from a CEO that sees this firsthand. I'm fortunate to be kind of on the other side, where I've provided professional advice to C-suite management for some time. And so I see it through the lens of the employees on what motivates them to stay, to either go to a company or stay with a company. So your insights prove valuable. Thanks, Brian. Couple of things. I'm going to talk about several different plans that coincide with some of the things that Brian pointed out. There are plans out there that create alignment, that offer flexibility. And when we talk about alignment, not only alignment with growth, as Brian pointed out, but one of the things that we try to do here at VWG, as well as what I see other owner-operators do, is that they want to get key employees to think as owners, not just valuable employees. And when you can get someone to think as an owner, you get a lot of intangibles. You don't have an employee leaving the office at the end of the day and they turn off until they get to the office the next day to think about what's going on. I could speak for myself as an owner-operator. I'm thinking about VWG 24/7. So if you can get employees to do that, I think that is nirvana. So the plans that we're going to talk about are aligned with that thought. We're going to talk about 4 different plans today. And this is going to be really high level because there are a lot of nuances where you could speak hours on end about any one of these. There are a lot of nuances, but we're going to focus high level. We're going to talk about what you typically find in public or late stage private growth companies. There's restricted stock, also known as RSUs. There are stock options. 2 different flavors, incentive stock options and non-qualified stock options. In private companies, we use phantom stock. Brian referred to some stock appreciation rights, which essentially are the same thing. And we will also talk about deferred comp plans, something else that Brian referred to. So with that, let's talk about restricted stock units. Restricted stock units, as mentioned, creates an alignment with the individual, where you're trying to get them to think as an owner. The beautiful thing about these plans, unlike your typical retirement plans that are governed by ERISA rules, these can be very targeted, flexible, and for lack of a better word, they can be discriminatory, meaning you can give in to the people that you want to incentivize without having to create a very expensive plan that cuts across the organization. In the case of RSUs, you could give restricted stock to an individual, and you can also tie it to specific goals. Employee A, you're going to get X amount of shares based on the company achieving a profit goal or a sales goal. That will create the ability to vest based on reaching those goals. Additionally, you can apply a vesting schedule where you don't want them to hit a goal, get all the stock, and then leave for greener pastures. You can create a vesting schedule over time that not only are they hitting strategic goals, but also you're creating longevity. So in that sense, it fosters loyalty. Some of the problems that exist with restricted stock units, especially when you're talking about a private company, is you may have an executive that is on paper doing very well. They've created some wealth, but they may not have a lot of liquid wealth. So as these RSUs become vested, that becomes a taxable event. So that individual will either have to come up with some money to pay the taxes, or they would end up surrendering shares in order to cover the taxes. The other issue too is that there are no dividends or voting rights prior to vesting. So until they actually become vested, they're just an employee as opposed to a business owner. Stock options were very popular, I would say, back in the day. They're used a lot less because quite candidly, there were a lot of shenanigans within the public markets where stock options would be given to executives at public companies. The stock would crater for whatever reason, and then those would be repriced. So it created a lot of bad publicity, and frankly, did not align well with creating that incentive for long-term growth. So we see a lot less of this. Having said that, they do create some of the most powerful incentives because there's a lot of leverage involved. When you're giving a stock option to someone at that particular time, it's not worth anything. If your stock is valued at $100 and you give someone an option to buy it at $100, then it's not worth anything. But for each incremental dollar it goes up, there's leverage because it's the right to buy stock, not necessarily the stock itself. So compared to RSUs, you get a lot more on the upside with stock options. Like RSUs, you can create incentives by aligning incentives by creating a vesting schedule. As I mentioned before, you can create leverage because it's a right to buy stock. The key difference between the incentive stock option and the non-qualified stock option are the way they are exercised and held and the tax treatment. On an incentive stock option, when you vest your stock and you decide to exercise that option to buy the stock, there is no taxable event on the exercising of that stock. It becomes what's known as an AMT preference item, which again, this gets in the weeds, and we'll talk about that a little later. On the non-qualified options, let's say you vest, your exercise price is at 100, the current price is at 150, and you decide to exercise the stock options, then that $50 delta is going to be treated as income to you. And so you will have to come up with obviously a payment to pay for those taxes. Moving on to the deferred comp. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, we are, sorry. So deferred comp plan, I'm seeing this used a lot more. As Brian mentioned, he just instituted one. As mentioned earlier, 401ks have their limitations because you can, number one, only put so much in, and two, if your organization has a disproportionate amount of what we call non-highly compensated and they don't participate, then that further limits the amount that a highly compensated can participate. So it can be, as I mentioned, very limiting. A deferred comp plan can be very targeted towards an executive, and it can be extremely generous. I've seen plans that allow an individual to defer as much as 100% of their compensation into a deferred comp plan. Now, what does that mean? If you make, let's say, a $200,000 salary, you can decide to say, you know what, I'm only going to take $100,000 of that, and I'm going to take another $100,000 and put it into a plan much like a 401k, where it's going to sit in some sort of investment vehicle, whether it's insurance or a suite of mutual funds. It's going to grow tax-free, and then later on, due to compounding and not having to pay taxes on that, it's going to be a much bigger number that down the road I could start drawing on. So the power of compounding in that is extremely powerful. One of the benefits of this, obviously, is that it further aligns the executive with the company, because a deferred comp plan, and this cuts both ways, like a problem and a benefit, is that as you're deferring comp into the plan, those assets are still on the balance sheet of the company. So you are still, as an employee, very incentivized for the success of that company. At the same time, you are at risk that if the company does go bankrupt, you become a creditor of the company, much like any other creditor. So there's good and bad with that. And the reason why the IRS allows this in the first place, it falls under the section 409A, is that because your salary is at risk, they allow that benefit to grow tax-free. However, having said that, what I have seen the courts rule on in the past is that because these assets are viewed as wages, they're generally given some preferential treatment in a bankruptcy proceeding. That's not a guarantee. However, the precedent shows that this is a favored class. Phantom stock is I would say, is a derivative of a deferred comp plan. For individuals that are not privy to a restricted stock unit or a stock option, you can incentivize them with a like stock, a phantom stock, and this is the stock appreciation rights that Brian referred to earlier. It's just simply taking a form of deferred compensation, and instead of investing it in a suite of mutual funds or insurance product, you're getting it tied to the value of the company. So as the company's value increases, you're getting participation in that lockstep. Now, the drawback for the phantom stock versus the RSU is an RSU, once you own it, and you own it for more than a year, it's treated as a long-term capital gain. In the case of a phantom stock, once you get it and once you vest and cash it in, it's always treated as income. So there's a tax disadvantage on the phantom stock versus an RSU. Lastly, I'm going to give a little pitch, not just for VWG, but I would say all fiduciary services out there. One of the problems that I see out there in working with executives is that there are a lot of moving parts here. And as fluent as an executive is in finances, all of these programs coming together can be perplexing. And so when you have stock options, restricted stock, 401k, the questions always come up, okay, I have all these different pots to choose from. Where should I put my money? And it's obviously determined by the individual. It's very unique. There's not a one standard answer. So all these executives need to look at their own situation, whether they have kids that they're saving for 529s, or they're having a desire to save for a second home, or they have ailing parents. That all of these factors determine what they should be saving their money in. And with all these choices, they need someone to quarterback what's the best way to save this. So I can speak for VWG. We have a wonderful executive service offering where we'll come in and we'll work with individuals to do this planning. As an added perk, we see a lot of companies providing a stipend for these executives to bring on someone like VWG to help quarterback the analysis. So with that, I'm going to give it back to Christina, and we will continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Last but certainly not least, we turn it over to Kim Moulton. Kim is a senior benefits consultant with Marsh & McLennan, and she will show us how you put together a comprehensive benefits package. Kim?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Jeff and Brian. And so I'm going to kind of now focus with a benefits lens around comprehensive strategy with the executive benefits programs that a lot of employers are looking to create. We find that usually a company, if we list and see a list of their top priorities, the ability to reward, to create reward programs that attract, motivate, and retain top talent is usually one of the top 5. And so, in today's environment, there's a lot of expected with corporate executives, and they have expectations of their own. And so there are a lot of building blocks that are out there to create some pretty comprehensive strategies around executive benefits. So what are the needs and goals of your business and family? So your executive team is vital to the future success of your company. They're doing the blocking and tackling. They're managing your employees. They're managing your customers. And traditionally, the chassis, the group benefit program that is in place in the majority of companies doesn't necessarily meet the needs of your executive team. And so through an executive benefit strategy, the employer can say, we're going to do something unique to you and let you know how important you are to our strategy. And so things around life and disability, supplemental retirement, medical reimbursement programs, long-term care insurance, just personal risk coverage, and then the succession planning with buyout strategy and overhead with business continuity programs. So with that, again, that group benefit base, we find there's a lot of potential benefit gaps. And when we go in and do sort of gap analysis, we find that a lot of the key executives are not being covered wholly in the same way that other employees are covered based on the fact that they're either high wage earners. And so, some of the limits around contribution limits around qualified benefit plans, benefit limits that are imposed by ERISA, discrimination testing, restrictive provisions, and lack of really differentiated solutions in the group benefits market really allows, or is important why strategic planning around the executive benefits side is very important. And then business owners are sometimes overlooked. You know, we tend to focus on the executive team, and executive benefit programs solve a lot of viability for the business with the focus towards the business owner. So similar strategies that we put in place for executive teams, we've got solutions that are tailored to business owners. And you know, the average business owner has been focused on business development, you know, running a company, and sometimes don't consider or don't take a moment to take a step back and say, what would happen if something were to happen to that key person or that business owner? And so not only is this a focus on the executive team, but also a focus on that business owner and succession planning, you know, to help sustain, you know, the business going forward and cover expenses. So what are some of the benefits building blocks that we're seeing, you know, pretty traditionally considered? And one of those plans is executive disability. So traditionally, the group benefits, the group disability program covers 60%. But when you're talking the high compensated, that 60% is probably really, in reality, closer to 40%. So now you've taken these key employees and they're already at a disadvantage to the regular employees because they're not getting that full coverage. So you really want to maximize that group base and then tailor a solution that's targeted towards you know, protection of these other employees. And you know, some of the things are around compensation. You know, the group plan may not cover bonuses and commissions, so these are ways to cover the entire scope of compensation. We have the ability to improve your definition of disability, extend duration. These can be funded through employer paid and or voluntary, and depending on the taxability advantage that you guys are looking to solve, you know, you've got the flexibility in these programs to make it 100% employer paid and or employee paid. And then layering strategy, so you can put in supplemental programs and have higher limits and really fill in those gaps. And the gaps are pretty easy to identify. I mean, we can usually look at what we call, you know, the census and look at the level of, you know, income, and pretty traditionally anybody over 100,000 is normally not covered or traditionally not covered by the group plan that may be in place. So these can increase income replacement, you know, beyond the 60% to 65 to 70 or even to 75% through an executive disability program.
Tim, just to back up a little bit on the disability, and the reason they're not able to fully participate or take advantage of that disability is because there's a monthly cap on it.
Correct.
So they would get 60% up to like $10,000 a month. So an executive making $500,000, I mean, that becomes
Closer to 40%.
right.
For that person, correct.
And then you have a salesperson that has to travel a lot for their job. They're highly compensated. They're getting nice bonuses, and they become disabled, and they can no longer travel. Right. That definition of disability might say, oh, but you can work a desk job and do internal sales. And so then their compensation has significantly changed because they can't do the job that was earning those big bonuses.
Correct. Yep.
So the disability policies that you're putting in place really
Are more
make
tailored.
them whole.
Correct. Are more tailored to those exact situations. Yep.
Perfect.
So, so the next building block is around life insurance, and I like to always say that this is far more than a death benefit, and it's not about a flat amount. You know, when we traditionally hear life insurance, you know, we think it's just a flat term policy. You can do a lot of creative strategy around executive life insurance. Golden handcuff strategy with vesting, like Jeff mentioned, being able to keep somebody longer because they can see that there's investment coming if they stay longer with the company. And you can align the tax implications now and into the future with the vesting strategies. They offer unique tax advantages, and currently we're seeing they're the primary market solution now for long-term care insurance. And so, we're kind of look at when we come in and meet with our clients, what priorities are you trying to solve for? And even around the ownership side, structure to minimize tax consequences. Life insurance is a really good platform to do a lot of things outside of traditional life insurance. And so you can see sort of in the chart here the different variations around being able to bolt on different value adds to an executive life insurance program.
As part of the executive life insurance program, what if you've got one executive that's just traditionally not going to be insurable? If you're doing a policy for all of the executives, do you get some underwriting?
Correct. Yeah, so you're getting, so a lot of these policies, even though they're targeting certain populations, because they're still written through a group plan, you're getting not only concession on underwriting, but you're also getting usually better rates. So you're getting a value that person wouldn't be able to get in the market standing alone. You're able to get some great underwriting concessions and additional competitive rates. So great question.
Thank you.
So long-term care. This has been sort of a magic word, under the Affordable Care Act. The Class Act was actually put into place. Now it has been disbanded, but there is a strong concern that we as Americans have not done enough to save, and being able to maintain our lifestyles when we're in the retirement phase, and not eating into the retirement that we have saved through our care. And that's why the long-term care programs are usually something everybody wants to talk about, but they're actually not that popular in terms of people know they need it, but they tend to wait to really look and dive into it. And really, we're seeing probably only 5% of companies actually are offering a long-term care program. And so there are advantages, again, to putting one in place through an executive benefits program through a corporation. There are tax incentives to not only the corporation, but to the individual. Again, there's streamlined underwriting that we just mentioned on the life insurance side. There's accelerated premium payment structures around a group long-term care program where you can really maximize tax savings by paying over 10 years or up to age 65. And so we're finding these programs to be, people want to talk about them. They're good for everybody, and they really are an important part of the planning process. And traditionally, there are two different types of long-term care policies. There are traditional reimbursement models, which have triple tax advantage to make it probably one of the most favorable employer-sponsored programs. And now we're seeing probably 75% of the long-term care market is being covered through these what we call hybrid models that don't have the same tax advantages that the traditional model has, but because of the dual coverage or the dual value with the life product, we're finding them to be very popular. And so, long-term care is going to protect those assets. If you're in a situation where you've got high-cost care scenarios later in life. And so, long-term care is another one of the building blocks that we find to be pretty important to the conversation. And so, next, let's talk about personal and group excess risk. So, sort of like we talked about with the life insurance and disability, that group plan that your employer has in place doesn't necessarily cover certain employees, fully. The same is true with, the liability that's provided with your auto policy is usually not enough for high net worth individuals to protect their actual net worth. So a $500,000 coverage limit is not going to cover someone with a $5 to $10 million net worth. And so, we're working with employer groups to put in group excess risk, and so that if you're sued, you've got coverage there that is an excess liability, and it actually stacks on top of your homeowners, your automobile coverages to really proportionally cover, really up to that $1 to $50 million mark. And so, we're finding that these also, again, simplified policy management when it's offered through a group plan, group rates and simplified underwriting, again, is another advantage to why it's very popular for employers to consider these types of coverages to their executive team. And so another building block is medical executive reimbursement plans. I think you probably have heard, executive physicals. Well, this takes executive physicals to a whole nother level. So this is essentially going to eliminate all of the noise around your traditional benefits program. What's covered in network, what's not, what are my out-of-pocket maxes with this high deductible plan that we're seeing become more and more popular in the benefit portfolio of most organizations. And so these medical executive reimbursement plans just say, listen, you don't have to worry about, we're going to cover the majority of your out-of-pocket expenses. They're going to cover executive physicals, dental and vision coverage as well, and you're not going to have to worry about network restrictions. You're going to be able to have the freedom of choice for you and your family to go to the doctor that you want to go to, and seek the care that you want in the market, and really, have everything covered. And the great thing about these programs is they really can be structured with tiered solutions to really target certain populations. And so you can see right here just 3 examples of groups that we're working with our employer groups, and the true flexibility that you have through covering multiple layers of targeted populations within an employer group. And then finally, buyout funding and overhead expense. And so, what happens when someone gets disabled? How are you going to fill that role or provide the funding to go and find that other person in the market and train them, and or sell the company? I always love to say to business owners, if something happens, do you want to go into business with your business partner's family? And pretty much traditionally the answer is a hard no. And so these kinds of programs, allow for, in case something were to happen, that situation is not, something that business partner is faced with. And they offer both life and disability protection, they keep the lights on during the transition period. So it's not only potentially about, filling the role, it's also about keeping that business, going in terms of if something were to happen to one of those key folks. So that is sort of a overview of sort of the building blocks that we see pretty traditionally in place. And now I'm just going to kind of quickly touch on just 2 case studies just to kind of make those programs seem a little bit more, real life in terms of what does an executive disability program. So this is an actual group that we worked with. We came in and saw that they were fairly highly compensated employees. The average salary was around $300,000, and they had several people, in the 7-figure range. And so immediately we saw that the group plan was just not covering the majority of employees. So there were some pretty big gaps. And so, and in addition, all the employees were impacted by the taxability of long-term care benefits. When disability is covered and paid for by your employer, it becomes a taxable benefit to you, the employee. And so already it's a, you know, even if we're talking about a 60% replacement of income that then is taxed, you're already looking at probably closer to, you know, a 40% amount. And so looking at the taxability and certainly the high salary with this exact, you know, with this exact group, we came up with a solution to restore an additional $120,000 of annual income through a supplemental disability program that covered bonus compensation, which was not covered by the group plan. And again, that program can be employer paid and or voluntary, or what we call employee paid. And the benefit to having it being voluntary is that if the employee pays for it, it is then a non-taxable benefit to that employee at, you know, at claim. And so, you know, we recommended a guaranteed issue program that had, that was employer funding was required, and it had simplified medical underwriting, and we were able to maximize the enrollment and really cover and fill in those gaps for that employer group. And then the other case study is more focused on business owner strategy, and this was a restaurant that had two restaurant owners that had no retirement plan, and they both had equal shares and no retirement plan in place, and no interest in setting up a retirement plan. And so, so the same question, you know, to them is, do you want to go into business with your business partner's mother or wife, you know, if something were to happen? So we came in and looked at a solution to target those specific business owners versus the regular employees, and we set up a buyout funding, and you know, really got some solutions around permanent life insurance to cover a death benefit of $2 million to provide buyout funding and also sustain the family's lifestyle in case of death and or disability. So, and we actually also were able to add a long-term care rider to this. So that's just another part of the solution, and be able to solve for another problem around a buyout funding scenario. And so with that, I will pass it back to Christina.
Thank you so much, Kim. What I'd like to do now is really open it up to a Q&A. So, Jeff, you mentioned a lot of options, and I've heard a lot about incentive stock options. Does it always make sense to exercise the incentive stock options as incentive stock options?
So that's a great question, Christina. There are strategies behind on the employee side. Once they get an ISO, there's strategies to be the most tax inefficient. One of those strategies is, so let me give you an example. An employee is given 1,000 shares as far as options go. They're not little shares. It's an option to buy 1,000 shares. The current price is $10. So that's essentially 1,000 shares, strike price at $10. Now the employee can decide, I'm not going to do anything with this. There's no tax consequence with me just holding this. I'm going to wait for the stock to go up. Let's say the stock goes up to $20 and they are vested. They say, well, look, I've made $10,000. I'm going to exercise and sell those options. Well, when the employee does do that, they're going to pay income tax on that gain. The strike price being $10,000, the gross proceeds being 20, they're going to pay $10,000 gain in taxes. As an alternative, as the stock's going up and they vest, they can decide to exercise and hold. The reason they would do that is to get to a long-term capital gains tax rate as opposed to an income tax. So taking that example, 1,000 shares at $10, the stock goes to 15, they decide, you know what, I don't want to sell it yet, but I'm going to exercise it. They're going to come out of pocket, buy the shares at $10,000. Because they're ISOs, they don't pay any tax on that gain, that $5,000 phantom gain. It becomes what's called a preference item on AMT calculation. It's a little too complicated for this.
Yeah, there's a lot to
into
think about.
And so they may end up paying taxes if they fall into AMT. Well, they exercise it. Their strike price is 10. Their cost basis is now 15. And then if they hold it for another year and sell it at 20, as the example before, they will only pay taxes, long-term gains, on that extra 5. So the traditionally long-term gains taxes are lower than ordinary income. The problem you fall into, and this is something you have to monitor carefully, is back in the go-go days of the internet, people were employing this option where they were exercising their stock options in order to get that long-term capital gains tax running. They'd end up paying taxes on that phantom gain because they'd be in AMT. And then the stock came tumbling down. So they ended up paying taxes on that phantom gain because they fell into AMT, and they had nothing to show for it because the stock is now below their exercise price.
Oh, that'd be painful.
It was very painful. So you have to keep that in mind when deciding on whether or not to employ. And as I preach to all clients, taxes are one piece of the puzzle. You don't want the tax decision to be your only decision making when deciding what to do with your stock options. You have to take risk into account when employing these decisions.
Sounds like they also need to call their advisor.
They do.
Brian, I have a question for you. I think when we talk to business owners, a lot of times we tend to focus on their successes, and you've had a lot of success at Sense. Where would you say you messed up or you wish you could do differently? What would be something you look back on?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, this call has actually been very helpful, as a business owner and listening to the parts of the podcast that have happened. Since I actually stopped speaking, I started taking a lot of notes. So I would say that, from this particular conversation, if you think about planning and really think about, the planning dynamics of what's really important to the organization. One of the notes, that I took down that Jeff said, and I think he articulated it extremely well, is you want your key people to think like owners. And compensation and alignment around compensation and creating value is important, but there are other key things that make people feel like owners so that they're thinking about your business. So I'd say a couple quick things, looking back, are, one, really think about, planning. We had planned for growth, but I'm not so sure we had planned to be able to manage growth. And right now, as an organization, and I think a lot of organizations that grow rapidly, they're in a situation where they're kind of playing catch up, with their growth. So I'd say number one, is really planning, and two is giving the executives the tools to be able to grow with the organization and help the organization grow. Because many times you have key executives that are playing strategic roles, but then as the organization pivots, they're not necessarily well positioned, to for success. So looking back and listening to this, I would say planning is probably the #1 thing. I'd do more of it.
Good to know. So the growing pains are real.
I feel them every day.
Kim, if a company says, you know, we already have some of these benefits in place, what else should they consider?
So we hear that a lot. And so, again, you know, to tag on to what I just heard Brian say, you know, planning. You know, really, you know, we work and operate in such a dynamic environment, and then, you know, the average company is, you know, like StreetSense, experiencing, you know, massive growth, and so it really is important to really sit down and do a review, and make sure that the way that it is structured, program is structured, is aligned with your goals and meeting the needs of the employees. And that can change, you know, pretty quickly. I mean, a lot of times we come in to organizations and like, oh, we just, you know, met with somebody on the executive benefits team, and, you know, we did that 3 years ago. Well, 3 years, you know, their company has doubled in size, or, you know, increased their highly compensated employee footprint. So I feel probably most important is really just taking a look every year. I mean, we tend to look at our benefits programs once a year on the group side as we just go through the annual renewal process. And that's probably a good time each year to also focus on that executive benefit program and make sure that there aren't any additional gaps, and that you're getting, you know, the bang for your buck, and that the dollars that you're spending are really meeting the needs of your, you know, top talent, and, you know, addressing, you know, what they need.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim.
Absolutely.
So to kind of wrap things up with a rapid fire round, so I'll start with Brian and then go to Jeff and Kim. In one word or two, what is the
I don't even know how to do one word.
What is the biggest mistake you see companies or employees making with their benefits package? Brian?
And just to be super brief, is really not fully understanding them and being able to help employees really understand, you know, what the real benefit is, and why it's important to you as an organization. So it goes kind of beyond transparency and into inclusion in the process.
Great. Jeff?
Brian stole my answer.
Mine too.
Along that line, I've seen many employees misunderstand what their benefits are, and then end up allocating their own resources not aligned with their own personal goals.
And I would, you know, again, to what Brian and Jeff just said, yeah, poor communication, I think, and just lack of engagement, you know, just getting busy into the day and not taking the time to really make sure that the employees, and this is true beyond just your top talent, that your employees understand what you guys have worked hard to put in place, and are they utilizing, you know, those resources there. So, and then I guess just to add an additional mistake is just lack of curiosity. You know, it just becomes, you know, insurance on my end is not an easy thing to understand, even for highly educated people. They've made it, you know, it's a very, you know, confusing process. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like, you know, just making sure that you're continuing to make sure that you're not complacent, and is probably a mistake.
Jeff, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I use this analogy when talking to business owners to hammer home the idea that you want your employees to think like owners. When you're living, I lived in a neighborhood where I owned my home. My next door neighbor was a renter. My next door neighbor always had their grass overgrown. They didn't paint the house. They didn't take care of the house because they knew they were there for a short amount of time. Everybody else that owned their house had their lawn cut. They cared about what the appearance looked like. You knew that the upkeep was going on. That's the difference between owner and employee. You want to convince your employees to cut their grass.
I like that.
Jeff, I use the analogy of renting a car. I don't know anyone who's taken their rental car to the car wash.
Yeah. Last question to wrap it up. In your opinion, what is the most undervalued part of the compensation package? Brian?
I do think health benefits are undervalued until somebody really needs them. I think there's a better way to really share and understand health benefits. I would say equally with that, the 401k, we have that for our employees, and recognizing the value of savings and compound increase in interest is something that people really don't see until they're older. So I think those are two things that are undervalued, especially by younger employees.
Yeah. Jeff?
I agree with Brian. Unless someone has actually gone out and gotten their own health care, most people come into the workforce and they're used to it being subsidized. They don't realize the benefit that's being paid because they just can't see it. It's not tangible like a 401k balance. However, in my world, in terms of my presentation, I'd say stock options are the most undervalued, because unless the company is growing in value, it's just sitting there as a zero. Mm-hmm. But what they don't realize is the upside potential as that grows.
Kim?
Again, just to again copy what they have said, is definitely the retirement benefits. I mean, we hear statistics, you hear on the news, the average American is not saving. And so retirement for sure would be, probably one of the most undervalued. And then disability and life insurance. I mean, we've seen, key employees or key folks, business owners, that didn't have a life insurance policy, and go from living a very great lifestyle. As a matter of fact, I used to share, many years I worked for BB&T, Louis Lobo, who is one of the key people. He would go out all the time and say it happened to his family as a young child. His dad was a very successful entrepreneur and had a massive heart attack one day and wasn't covered. And they went from being a middle income family to really struggling. And so he always went out around and said the value of life insurance is really important too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that. And actually, to piggyback, I'm a young person. I had a child almost 4 years ago. And when I had that child, I actually had complications and went on a disability claim. And I was very surprised to find out that was a tax-free benefit, and also included, bonus potential and stuff. So that was, it was great. Now, one thing I would just add that I think is undervalued is health savings account.
Yeah.
In our previous webinar, we drilled down on how we think that is a fantastic tool. So if your company is offering an HSA, we really encourage you to learn more about it and how that can also be a great retirement tool. So with that, I just want to wrap it up and say thank you so much for everyone joining us. We hope you found this valuable. If you have any additional questions or you'd like the contact information for Kim Moulton, or even maybe Brian, I don't know if people can reach out to you and ask CEO questions, but please contact your advisor at VWG or contact Delaney Taggart with any additional questions. Thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing from you. So, Brian, we're just going to go ahead and disconnect.
Thanks.
There. Thank you
Thanks,
so much. You did a great job, and I think that added so much value to people listening in to have